PS3 number 24, Plan B, was described as old, fat PlayStation 3 backwards compatible parts, yellow light. Condition is 4 parts or not working. It was listed in pieces without a case. That was fine by me. The original plan was to replace the motherboard from PS3 number 1, which I destroyed attempting to reball. But the show was still good, so I'd get another chance. I figured I could fix this motherboard and plop it in. And it only cost me $27, so not too bad. But after it arrived, I noticed that while yes, it was a COK001, it was from a 20GB B model instead of an A model. It lacks the ribbon cable connector for the card reader. Technically, I could put a B model board into an A model case, but I like to restore the original intent with my repairs, and it could be misleading to sell an A model that doesn't have a card reader or Wi-Fi. So no, it needs a B model case instead. So Plan A was out. Okay, fine. Plan B for this B model motherboard. How fitting. As I stated before, the first thing I like to do is get the SYSCON error logs off the console. So that's my first goal. I ran into issues with gunk in the ribbon cable connector, and the SYSCON UART refused to auth no matter what I did. I went back and forth with it for over an hour before giving up. So I decided to just power it on and see how it acted. Basically, I had a yellow light of death with about 2.5 seconds. I'm pretty confident that's a box standard 3034. There is something I'd like to do with this console. I wanted to evaluate a pressure and heat test methodology to see if I can qualitatively tell the difference between a BGA failure and a bump failure. It would otherwise be a waste of time, but because there's controversy and the console annoyed me, I decided to perform these tests anyway. Also, I wanted to add my results to those of my friends who had previously been doing this. Also, I'm going to try a bit of a different format for this video. I recorded a lot of the conversations on Discord voice channel while working on the board, so I'm going to bring you along for the ride and edit stuff as I talk. Also, yes, I got permission from NASCAR, Sean, Samson A, and Josh, who will drop in and we'll have some interesting conversations. So it's really just, I don't know, kind of like a live stream, talking shop with the boys. So please be patient with my stammering doofusness. I still can't believe that when I need to make a circuit, I can open KiCad for free, prototype a printed circuit board, order it pre-assembled, and have it shipped to me in about a week. I would have thought this cost thousands, but it doesn't, thanks to the sponsor of this video, JLC PCB. Their prices are super affordable, perfect for a do-it-yourself hobbyist like me. When you need some 3D printed cell bracers for your PS3, or pre-populated tantalizers to fix bad NEC tokens, they got you covered. When I need more tantalizers, I order them by simply uploading the Gerbers, selecting 0.8mm thick PCB so they'll fit right. Are you tired of hand assembling them? Simply choose the option for PCB assembly. Upload the bill of materials and position file, then confirm the parts. Here's a tip. Shop around for the best price on caps here. Once everything looks good, add them to your cart and place the order. JLC PCB's engineers will take it from there and correct a lot of issues for you. Quality is excellent, and they do a flying probe electrical test to ensure every part is soldered correctly. They offer a variety of shipping options. I always choose the cheapest one, and I've still gotten it delivered in less than a week. So if you need any PCBs for your next project, I can honestly recommend you consider JLC PCB. Not because they're sponsoring the channel, but because I've personally used their services with fantastic results. And I must say, they do a beautiful job. Now, back to the video.
Yeah, and it's really easy to misattribute the success to something else that you did. So this is one of the reasons that bump issues and BGA crack issues are so infuriating, because they'll send you down a rabbit hole investigating, you know, something that you think is associated because it was a cause and effect thing, right? You did something and you assume causal relationship with the effect that you see, but it's not a causal relationship.
Right.
I'm still not convinced about whether or not you can tell the difference between a BGA and a bump failure, at least not with the PlayStation 3. Josh seems to think that the pressure test is a good indicator of BGA failures, and that if it doesn't work and heat does work, then that's a good indication of bump failures.
I'm going to jump in briefly and explain what the pressure and heat tests are. As the processors get hot, they expand and contract. Over time, this solder fatigue causes joints to fail, just like bending a paperclip too many times until it breaks. But there are two places it can happen, in the BGA or bumps. If the break is underneath the chip, in the ball grid array, the pressure test can force the crack back together and cause the artifacting to change or get the console to boot. If pressure affects it at all, it's a pressure test positive. The solder bumps between the die and interposer are closer to where the heat is produced and experience the most stress. To prevent them from breaking, a glue-like substance called underfill is applied, which braces the bumps. It reduces, but doesn't eliminate, the stress. But here's the kicker. The 90nm RSX on this motherboard is known to have defective underfill that can cause premature failure. It also afflicted the Xbox 360. If the bumps break, the underfill provides some resistance against responding to the pressure test. So the idea is the pressure test isn't enough force to push the bumps back together, but it is for a BGA defect.
And I'm just not sold on it. Like, I feel like the pressure from pushing down on the chip could also affect the bumps. He seems to think that the underfill provides enough support that you're not getting enough pressure, but the bumps are so much smaller than the cracks, right? Because a crack will propagate along this wedge. And so down here, where the crack is wider, yeah, you have some wiggle room, right? Maybe you're pushing down, like if this is the chip, the crack, right? And you're pushing down on it from a side angle, you're doing like this, right? But you're not making full contact because, yeah, the underfill is providing a little bit of resistance and force. But up here, where the crack is propagating, it's much thinner. And where it's making a little bit of extra contact right in here, like it's not fully broken, but it's intermittent, and sometimes it's connecting and it's not connecting, right? And then you squish it down a little bit. Well, now you've changed that whole impedance factor, right? Now maybe it's making connection where it wasn't before. Like, I think that there's a whole range of issues that you can have with bumps where even the slightest movement or the slightest temperature change could affect the bumps. So I really don't see how you could tell the difference by pushing on it if that's giving you a bump or a BGA defect. He seems to think it does, but that's based on his experience reballing hundreds of these consoles at this point. Well, not these consoles, Xbox 360s, and that's the other thing. Like at 360, you have a code, what is the E040 code, that can't be anything else. It's the communication between the EDRAM and the GPU. And the only traces between them are on the interposer. So it's literally the bumps. They're the only connector between the two chips. And if you get that E040, it must be a bump issue. Yeah, it can't be BGA. There are no BGA connections. So if you take an E040 case and you push on it and it does nothing, well, then you can say, okay, the pressure test doesn't work on bumps. And you have a test that actually works for that. We don't have anything like that on the PlayStation 3. Like there's so much more that's going on that we can't say for certain. But I'm starting to come over to his side that it's an indicator. Maybe it's 60-40% of the time, right? Or maybe it's 80-20. You press on it and it does nothing, and the heat test works, bump issue. Pressing hard, nice and firm. Nothing. But did it change the error?
No.
Nope. Same exact error. Pressing on center. I actually felt some heat, so it started to heat up. Same exact bit training. Now, it can also be the CPU. So the same RX3 line connects to the CPU right here in this corner. So I should also press on this corner just to be thorough. CPU warmed up, I can feel it, but did we get a different error? Nothing. Okay.
No.
I'm going to delid the RSX, I think. Give me a minute. I have to go find my butter knife. So what I like to do is add a little bit of pressure.
Yeah, that's what I did.
And just keep holding it until it... and it's loose. Okay. I want something that'll crush down that won't like add too much uneven force. So I'm thinking some aluminum foil. This is going to add maybe 0.1, 0.2 millimeters, just enough to add some extra pressure.
Right.
Directly on the die. All right, so I'm pressing in the center this time. A lot of force directly down on the die. No. What error did we get? Okay, so that result that at least supports Josh's hypothesis that you can't provide enough force without a bolt mod to affect the bumps.
The heat test, on the other hand, is when you heat the RSX above the melting temperature of the underfill. This allows the die to reseat and make a temporary connection, like holding two wires together. When the underfill cools and hardens, it locks in that position for a little while. This phenomenon was noticed by do-it-yourselfers and led to one of the earliest, air quote, fixes that began appearing with the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 scene. People would place the console in a box or wrap it in a towel and then heat it with a hairdryer. They didn't know why it worked, just that it sometimes did, and they knew it didn't last. But now we know why, and what I'm calling the heat test is a refined, targeted version of the towel trick that isolates the heat on the GPU itself so we don't damage other components. You'll see me do it later. The idea I'm not sold on is that we can use this to diagnose BGA or bump defects, which is what I'm struggling to believe at this point in the repair. Okay, you're caught up.
I'm going to do 150 like he suggested. I've set it to 150. If I can get it to about 100, then I'll call it okay. So we're over 100 now. So we're definitely above the TG. All right, I'd say that's enough. Yeah, so I think I basically concentrated the heat on the die, and there's not a whole lot of heat that would have gone through the board on the other side. So I doubt there's a whole lot of heat that got... I mean, I can feel the warmth in the area, no doubt, right? But it's not like super hot. Well, let's try it.
Yeah.
It hasn't yellow lighted yet. It's on. It just did the reset.
Okay. Well, it's going to overheat.
Yeah, it's going to overheat.
So the heat test worked.
All right, it's off now.
Yeah, thermal error. There you go.
So the heat test worked. The console's working as it's supposed to if there's a... Well, if there's a bump issue, quite frankly. So this is the third console we followed Josh's methodology that seems to be working. But with all the pressure I was pushing in all the areas of the BGA for it to not change the bit training at all, and then only start working after heating the die, and when pushing directly on the die, not getting it to change, that kind of does lead into the idea that maybe it's the bumps and the underfill is hard enough that you can't really deform it. So...
Right.
I don't know. I'm kind of starting to lean towards what he's talking about, and you know, he's got a lot more experience with 360s, and I tend to lean towards that. But we'll see. I need to stress test this, and your result was what, about 2 weeks, and Haha Bazinga's still going on with his. I don't know. He's probably at 9 or 10 by now. I haven't checked Discord. So this console, I did your pressure test, heat test thing with, to try to see if I could get it to boot with the heat test, but not with the pressure test. And it did. And in my experience, that's been the case more often than not. You press on the RSX, nothing happens. I pressed all over the RSX. I pressed on all four corners. Then I pressed hard in the center. Then I delidded it. And then I placed 4 layers of aluminum foil over the die and used a IHS that had the
that's
glue
already
removed.
Way more work than you have to do.
I know. I'm doing it all the ways to see if I can get a bump issue to present with a pressure test at all. So The other thing I
warning
wanted
you
to
that
do
if
is
you-
test to
in order
see
for the
if
pressure test to work with bumps, you're going to need an extreme amount of pressure.
yeah. So that's what I was testing. I wanted to see if
Yeah,
there was
you
any
won't
way
be
to do
able
it
to get it from
with
that.
just this type
You'd
of
have
pressure.
you'd have to be warping the board at that point, which is why I hate the bolt mod so much, because that's literally what it does. It bends the board.
So then I deleted the RSX and then I took off this glue, right? Because it's going to bridge a little bit of the difference between the VRAM and the die. And then I added 4 layers of aluminum foil here. And I confirmed that when I placed it on, it rocked a little bit back and forth. So all of the pressure was going directly down on the die. There was no bridging going on, you know, spreading the load to all 4 VRAM. I know for a fact when I did that test that I was pushing directly on the underfill on the die and I didn't get anything, nothing. So I think you're right that the underfill locks it in fairly well, at least enough to, in this case, not allow it to boot. And I was using bring up because I wanted to see if the bit training error changed, and it didn't change at all. RX3 every single time. So that was good news for the pressure test not affecting it. Then the second test I did was used a thermocouple on the RSX, heated it up to 100 degrees Celsius for about a minute, and then it booted. So
let me show you here.
okay, so
me know
I just
when the
want to see if
video
it's
actually
still going to
works.
work. So here we go. And it still works.
Nice. Let me know when you get a second.
Yeah. It must have overheated. I'll check that later. But yeah, I just wanted to see if it was still gonna boot. The other thing I'm gonna do with this console is now that I know that it boots, I've got to get a hard drive and figure out how to repair it. And then it didn't come with a Blu-ray drive, so I need to get one of those. But once I get it working, I'll stress test it an hour on, an hour off until it dies. However many cycles that takes. Each one of those on-off cycles is an accelerated 1-day test, is what I figure. It's basically a single play session, full heat up,
Right.
and then a full cool down. So if it lasts 14 days, that's about 2 weeks. And in my notes for about how long this type of test lasts, it seems like it's less than 2 weeks. A couple days to 2 weeks. I'm surprised it hasn't already died. But I did, I put the heat directly on the die, whereas most people are just wrapping it in a towel and heating it with a hair dryer. It's a very inexact method. That only lasts maybe a couple of days, a few
I've
hours.
actually tried that trick, but on a dead console.
It works. I mean, if you need to get your saves off the console because you're just replacing it, that would be fine. Like as long as you don't jam it in the back, right, and melt the pins, you're not trying to reflow the solder. You're not gonna reflow the solder.
Right.
It's just never gonna happen.
Yep.
But
I did it on
if you're just trying to heat it up and get it to work long enough to get your saves off, that's acceptable.
Do you have a second, Felix, to
go ahead.
to watch the video here? So I wanted to show you what I was telling you about, I think a week ago, whenever it was. This console here has a known BGA defect, and I know this because if I bend the board, I can stick a piece of paper under the balls. So I know for a fact that this has on the RAM data traces a BGA defect. So if I pull this up kind of like this and I squeeze this side of the heatsink, it will start up. Right? Just from that pressure. And then as soon as I let go, it will crash immediately. And you can see that when I do this, even like very light amounts of pressure will affect the corruption on the screen. And that's how I know that it's a BGA problem. And in my experience of reballing over 50 of systems that present with that exact symptom, the problem does not come back once you reball it. So it's literally, for those types of things, because the balls are unsupported by any other material, you barely need any, and also because it's such a large area on the board, it's very easy to actually disconnect those bumps. And for this reason, I found also, I think Squeak showed this as well, if you give the console a little smack, that will also show you. But it's what I should point out is that these types of tests should only be used as a confirmation. Like, they can't rule anything out, but they can show you, like it can show you this is the problem, but it can't show you this isn't the problem. I'll put it like that.
So I couldn't say for certain that it's not balls or bumps. I can say maybe 80% confidence that it's not the BGA if the pressure test doesn't work, but the heat test does.
Right. I mean, I would go more than that. I would say it's probably like 95% or even more.
See, I think
I've never ever
confidence
I've had,
intervals
only
again, right? So
that acted
my
like that,
confidence
and it wasn't a BGA.
is based on some random number I'm pulling out of nowhere. It's not an actual percentage that I've calculated from tests, and I don't have a 3D X-ray to know for certain.
Right.
But I can say that, like, I feel more confident about this test now, having done it myself and seen it done on a couple of other consoles here on Discord. We have Soupy and NASCAR who have done it now on a couple of consoles, and Samson as well.
On PS3s?
Yeah. On PS3s. The exact testing method I just explained. First, confirming the pressure test does nothing. And actually pushing on the die, like being real careful to make sure that you're actually getting some force in there. Not so much you harm the BGA, not so much that you're flexing the board and causing a BGA fault, but you know, I had something on the back side while I was pressing so that it was bracing the back of the PCB, so it couldn't flex. But I knew if there was a BGA defect, it would have, or probably would have. I've had a BGA defect before. I know it was a BGA defect because Squeeped reballed it, and the reball failed later. And I could tell because I would barely even have to push a little bit, and it would boot back up. And I would get graphical artifacts too, just like you showed, where while I was pressing, it would be on, but if I let go, then it would freeze. You'd get like some lines on the screen, and then it would go beep, beep, beep.
Right. And that's down to structural problems. Like that should not happen if the system is properly designed.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually did a heat test on a Xenon recently, and it didn't even last 12 hours before it got 0020 again.
Yep, there you go.
So, but the E01MG, I did the heat test on, same temp, same time, lasted 14 thermal cycles, 15th cycle, died.
That's why I liked your results, because didn't you say that it didn't respond to pressure test, but it did to the heat test? All right, so if we apply Josh's hypothesis or theory, I guess it's a theory for him, because on 360 it actually works. But on PlayStation 3 it's a hypothesis. Let's say that that's true. Then your bump issue should return when the pressure relaxes over time. And it did. It took about 2 weeks. So now I want to see that same result with Haha Bazinga's console. I wonder how many thermal cycles it's going to take before that thing fails again. Pressing down on the chip, the RSX, doesn't cause it to do anything. I would say that has been my experience more often than pressing down and having it change. So if Josh's theory is correct, that means that it's more bumps than BGA.